Our channel shares stories that actually happened. Do you know or have experienced any shocking stories? We also tell the stories of our subscribers. Leave them in the comments so we can share them with the world. We want to hear from you. He never imagined that a day like this would come. That morning, everything felt so ordinary, just another day in his routine. He woke up early as usual, made his coffee, and prepared for another long day of work. The house was still quiet when he left. His wife Sarah still asleep in their bedroom, and the kids' laughter, once the heartbeat of the home, had long been replaced by the heavy silence that had settled in ever since Lucas had disappeared. It had been 6 long years since the disappearance of his son, a day that had changed everything in his life. Lucas was only 8 years old when he vanished, after going to buy an ice cream from a truck parked outside their house. No one had seen him after that. The only clue they had was a grainy footage of him holding an ice cream cone, walking away from their house and then disappearing into thin air. The police had followed leads, but after a year, it all went cold. With each passing day, the hope of ever finding Lucas grew thinner. The pain of not knowing what had happened to him was unbearable, but Michael, like his wife, pushed through the days, pretending that everything was okay, even when the emptiness gnawed at his insides. That day, though, something in the air felt different. Michael had been to countless junkyards before, looking for car parts or replacement vehicles for their family. It was part of the regular errands he had to run to keep things going, just the mundane things that made up life. He had no reason to think anything extraordinary would happen that day. But there was this feeling, this inexplicable pull, that led him to visit a junkyard he had never been to before. Something inside him, some sixth sense, told him that if he went there, maybe, just maybe, he would find a piece of the puzzle that had been missing for so long. The place was a mess, just as any junkyard would be. Rusty cars piled up everywhere, the smell of old metal and oil hanging heavy in the air. But as soon as he stepped out of his truck, something caught his eye. It was an old ice cream truck, hidden away behind piles of scrap metal. It was faded and worn, but the distinctive pink and blue paint job, the large cone mounted on top, was unmistakable. His heart skipped a beat. He knew without a doubt that this was the same ice cream truck he had seen on the security footage, the one near his house the day Lucas vanished. He walked closer to the truck, his steps slow and hesitant, as if he were afraid the scene might disappear the moment he blinked. His hands were trembling, and for a moment he just stood there, staring at the vehicle, as the weight of what it could mean settled heavily on his chest. The ice cream truck wasn't just an ordinary old vehicle, it was a symbol, a haunting reminder of everything that had been lost. Michael's mind raced, and his heart ached. He had spent years chasing dead ends, trying to find clues, trying to hold on to some shred of hope that one day he would know what had happened to Lucas. And now, standing in front of this forgotten relic, it felt as if the universe had finally given him a sign, one that could either bring him closer to the truth or rip open wounds he had tried to keep buried. He carefully inspected the truck, his fingers brushing against the faded paint, feeling as if he were touching the last known connection to his son. The truck was rusted and old, but the details that stood out to him were unmistakable. The oversized ice cream cone on top, the peculiar paint job that had once been bright, but had now faded with time. Michael could almost see Lucas in his mind, the excitement in his eyes as he begged for money to buy that ice cream, his small hand reaching out to grab the cone. Michael could see the way Lucas's face lit up as he ran to the truck, eager to enjoy a sweet treat on a warm day. It was the last memory he had of him, and now this truck seemed to be the only physical trace of that day. For a moment, Michael had to fight back tears. He hadn't cried in years, not since that day when everything changed. He didn't allow himself the luxury of tears anymore, not with all the responsibilities he had to shoulder, not with the constant pressure of not knowing. But now, in front of the truck, the floodgates almost broke open. He reached for his phone with shaky hands and dialed Sarah, his wife. He knew he had to tell her about what he had found, but he couldn't bring himself to say the words over the phone. He could barely speak to her about anything anymore, not without the weight of their shared grief hanging over every conversation. Instead, he left a message, his voice barely above a whisper, telling her he found something. something important. As he stood there looking at the truck, Michael realized he had no idea what to do next. The truck was obviously a piece of the puzzle, but what did it mean? Had someone deliberately hidden it here, as if trying to cover up a crime? Or had it been abandoned and forgotten just like Lucas had been, left to rot and fade into obscurity? His mind swirled with questions and possibilities, but he knew one thing for sure. This was the break he had been waiting for. Whether it led to answers or more questions, Michael had no intention of leaving this junkyard without finding out more. This might finally be the moment that changed everything. Michael stood frozen for a moment longer, his eyes glued to the truck, as if he were waiting for it to speak to him, to offer some kind of answer, some clarity. But nothing happened. The wind blew, rustling the leaves on the ground, and the sounds of distant traffic reached his ears, but there was nothing else. No revelation, no sign. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The hours spent searching, the countless dead ends, the long nights wondering where Lucas could be. He realized it had all led to this moment. He couldn't let it slip away. He had to act, had to find someone who could help. He pulled his phone back out, this time calling the police, his voice steady but urgent as he explained what he had found. The operator listened carefully, asking questions and taking notes. She promised to send someone out to the junkyard, but Michael's heart sank as he hung up. He couldn't just wait for them to show up. The truck might be gone by then, or worse, someone might try to move it or cover it up. He had to do something now, even if it meant acting alone. He made his way to the junkyard office, his footsteps echoing in the quiet of the place, and found the owner, a man named Frank, sitting behind a cluttered desk, flipping through papers. Michael could feel the weight of the moment on his shoulders, the pressure mounting as he explained who he was and what he had found. Frank didn't seem particularly interested at first, shrugging off Michael's concern with a dismissive gesture, but the mention of the ice cream truck caught his attention. Michael described the truck in detail, and Frank's attitude shifted slightly. "Yeah, I've had that thing here for a while," Frank said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Came in a few years ago. Some guy dropped it off, paid me to take it. He said he was getting out of the business and didn't want to deal with it anymore, just left it here." Michael's heart raced as Frank spoke, the words sinking in, but they only raised more questions. "Who was the guy?" Michael asked, his voice tight with desperation. Frank hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "I don't really remember much about him," Frank said finally. "He was middle-aged, African-American, didn't give me much info. Paid in cash, though. Said he just wanted it gone." Michael's stomach churned. This was it. This was the break he needed, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt more like a slow burn, the beginning of something that could finally lead him to the truth, but only after unearthing more pain. He knew the truck was connected to Lucas somehow. But how? And why was it just sitting here, hidden away, when it should have been part of the investigation years ago? He pressed Frank for more details, but the man seemed increasingly evasive, almost as if he regretted getting involved at all. Michael, growing frustrated, decided to take matters into his own hands. He couldn't just stand there waiting. He had to call the police again and make them come out immediately. He wasn't going to let this slip through his fingers. Michael paced around the junkyard, his eyes darting between the truck and Frank's disinterested face, as the minutes dragged on like hours. His heart pounded with a mix of adrenaline and fear. Fear that this lead could slip away, or worse, that Frank might be hiding something important. His mind raced with the possibilities. Could Frank be more involved than he was letting on? Had he known more about the truck's significance all along? And if so, why had he kept it here for so long? With each passing moment, the weight of the situation grew heavier. He was so close to something, but it felt like the pieces were slipping out of his grasp. He couldn't wait any longer. Michael pulled out his phone again, calling the police once more, his voice urgent as he demanded that they send someone immediately. The officer on the other end promised to dispatch a team, but Michael wasn't sure how much time he had. He wasn't going to sit back and wait for answers to come to him. He needed them now. He walked back to the truck, inspecting it again, trying to piece together whatever clues it might offer. The rusted exterior, the faded logo, the ice cream cone on the roof. It all seemed like some sick joke. How could something so innocuous be tied to something so horrific? His mind flashed back to the countless hours he and Sarah had spent going through missing persons reports, speaking with detectives, and visiting every lead that came their way, only to be met with dead ends. They had been clinging to the smallest shred of hope, refusing to give up. But every day that passed felt like a lifetime. Michael wondered if his son was even still alive. The thought terrified him. Was he being held somewhere, forgotten, or was he lost forever? It felt like the world had stolen his son and then tried to erase all traces of him. As the police sirens finally wailed in the distance, Michael's anxiety only deepened. Was this really the break they had been waiting for? Would they find something that would finally lead them to Lucas? The truck seemed like the key, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something bigger at play, something more sinister. It wasn't just about finding a vehicle that had been connected to his son's disappearance. It was about understanding why it had been hidden away for so long, and who was responsible for hiding it. The junkyard, once a place of routine errand running, had now become the center of a storm that Michael had never anticipated. He glanced at Frank, who was still standing by the door of his office, his expression unreadable. Michael couldn't help but feel a surge of suspicion. This man had been sitting on a crucial piece of evidence for years. Why hadn't he come forward before? What was he afraid of? But Michael knew he couldn't waste time questioning Frank any longer. The police were here now. They would take over, and hopefully this would be the lead they needed to uncover the truth. The police arrived within minutes, their cruisers cutting through the quiet of the junkyard, lights flashing in the dim afternoon light. Michael watched as they stepped out of their vehicles, their expressions serious as they approached. Officer Reyes, a woman who had been involved in the early stages of Lucas's case, recognized Michael immediately and gave him a nod of acknowledgement. The officers moved efficiently, immediately assessing the situation, and Michael felt a surge of hope mixed with anxiety. They were here now, and for the first time in years, it felt like the pieces might finally start coming together. But even as the police swarmed around, inspecting the truck and questioning Frank, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far darker than he had ever imagined. He stood to the side, his hands clenched into fists as Reyes began speaking with Frank. The junkyard owner seemed nervous now, his eyes darting around, avoiding direct contact with the officers. Michael could see the fear in his face, the same fear he had seen countless times before in people who had something to hide. Frank's story wasn't adding up, and Michael could tell that Reyes wasn't buying it. She'd been part of the original investigation, and she knew the importance of the ice cream truck. The fact that it had been hidden away for so long, completely off the radar, was a glaring red flag. Frank kept insisting that he didn't know anything, that he was just doing a favor for a guy who had paid him to take the truck, but Michael wasn't convinced. There was something about Frank's demeanor that didn't sit right with him. As the officers continued to inspect the truck, Michael found himself drifting toward the back of the junkyard, trying to give them space but also hoping that something, anything, would happen that would bring him closer to the truth. He glanced over at the other vehicles strewn across the lot, rusted and forgotten, and for a moment, the weight of the years of searching seemed to press down on him. He had been living in this limbo for so long, never quite knowing if Lucas was out there somewhere, still alive, or if he was lost forever. The uncertainty was suffocating, and every moment that passed without answers felt like another piece of him slipping away. Then, as he was walking back toward the group of officers, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. His heart leapt into his throat as he read the words. She was on her way to the junkyard. Michael had asked her not to come, not wanting to drag her into this emotional whirlwind. But he understood why she couldn't stay away. He could feel her anxiety over the phone, her need to be involved, to be part of this moment that could finally bring them some answers. Michael quickly typed back, telling her to stay safe and not to get too close to the police. He didn't want her to see the stress and tension that hung in the air, the uncertainty of what was to come. As the officers continued to process the scene, Michael's mind raced. The ice cream truck was an undeniable lead, but what did it really mean? Was it just a coincidence that it was found in a junkyard all these years later, or was there something more to it? Michael couldn't stop thinking about the man who had dropped the truck off at Frank's junkyard. Who was he? Why had he disappeared, and what was his connection to Lucas's disappearance? The questions were overwhelming, and for the first time in a long time, Michael felt a flicker of hope, mixed with an even deeper sense of dread. He knew they were on the right track, but the road ahead was still uncertain. Minutes passed in tense silence as the officers continued their work. Michael couldn't stop pacing, his eyes constantly shifting from the truck to the officers, trying to piece together what was happening. He couldn't shake the feeling that something more was lurking just beneath the surface, something even more sinister than he had anticipated. As the police examined the truck, Michael tried to focus on Frank, who was now sitting on a worn-out chair in his office, nervously looking over at the police officers as they worked. Frank's anxiety was palpable, and Michael couldn't help but wonder why this man who had been sitting on this truck for so long seemed so eager to distance himself from it. He had to know more. There had to be something he wasn't saying. But Michael also knew that Frank wasn't going to give up anything easily, not without a fight. As Officer Reyes continued to question Frank, Michael took a deep breath and walked back toward the truck, hoping to catch a glimpse of something that might help unravel the mystery. He knelt down next to one of the back tires, his eyes scanning the rusted metal when he noticed something strange. A small scratch on the metal, almost like someone had scratched it intentionally. His heart skipped a beat as he ran his fingers over it. It wasn't a natural dent or a result of wear and tear. This was different, something that had been done deliberately. It was as if someone had tried to hide something, to cover up evidence. His mind began to race. Had someone tried to scrub away something that might connect the truck to Lucas? His instincts screamed that this was no coincidence, that there was a hidden truth buried somewhere in all of this. Just as he was about to investigate further, he heard the sound of a car pulling up. Michael turned to see a familiar face. Officer Davis, the lead detective on Lucas's case from years ago. He had always been a steady presence in the investigation, but even he had given up hope after a while. Seeing him now brought a new wave of emotions crashing over Michael: hope, frustration, and a strange sense of fear. Davis walked over to him, his face grim, and Michael could see that the detective shared his unease. "I got a call about the truck," Officer Davis said, his voice low. This is definitely the one we've been looking for. I don't know how it ended up here, but I've got a bad feeling about all of this." Michael nodded, unable to speak. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the past 6 years pressing down on them. This was the moment they had been waiting for, but it didn't feel like a victory. Not yet. Not until they had answers. The truck could be the key, but Michael needed more. They all needed more. Davis glanced at the truck and then back at Michael, his expression unreadable. "We're going to need to take this in. We'll go over it with a fine-tooth comb. We can't afford to miss anything this time." Michael's heart pounded in his chest as the words hit him like a punch. They couldn't afford to miss anything. This was the chance they had been waiting for. But even as they took the truck away, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this, something that would change everything. He was on the edge of something, but it felt like it was still just out of reach. As the truck was carefully loaded onto a tow truck and driven away, Michael stood still, staring after it, his mind racing. It felt like everything he had been through, every sleepless night, every dead-end search, every moment of despair, had led to this. And yet the questions were multiplying faster than the answers. He couldn't understand why the truck had been hidden here for so long. What had Frank been trying to cover up? Why hadn't anyone else connected the dots sooner? The idea that something as simple as an ice cream truck could hold the key to Lucas's disappearance seemed surreal. But now that it was in the hands of the police, Michael had no choice but to trust the process. The truth was finally within reach, but the uncertainty of what that truth might be left him unsettled. After the truck was driven away, Michael turned back to find Sarah walking toward him. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with concern, but there was something else in her expression: determination. She had arrived just after the police, and Michael could tell she had been holding her breath ever since. He hadn't wanted her to come, but he understood why she had. She had just as much of a right to be part of this as he did. She was as much a part of Lucas's story as he was. And despite everything they had been through, despite the years of pain and unanswered questions, they were still a family. She reached out for his hand and Michael squeezed it tightly, trying to comfort her, though he didn't feel comforted himself. "I know this is hard," Sarah said softly, her voice trembling. "But this could be it, Michael. This could finally be the break we've been waiting for." Michael didn't answer at first. Instead, he simply nodded, his heart heavy with a mixture of hope and fear. He wanted to believe that this was it, that they were finally going to get the answers they had been searching for. But after all this time, after so many false leads and dead ends, it was hard to allow himself to feel anything other than cautious optimism. The officers were still working, their voices drifting through the air as they discussed the next steps. Michael and Sarah stood off to the side, watching the process unfold, but neither of them could seem to fully grasp what was happening. It felt like the world had stopped moving around them, frozen in time, and all they could do was wait. They had no control over what was going to happen next. It wasn't long before Officer Reyes approached them, her expression grave but resolute. Michael's stomach tightened. He had been bracing for this moment, the moment when the police would finally reveal whether the truck was truly connected to Lucas. He could see in Reyes's eyes that she wasn't giving them false hope. She wasn't going to sugarcoat it. "We've got some leads," Reyes said, her voice steady. "We're running prints, DNA tests, and we'll go through the vehicle with a fine-tooth comb. But the truck's VIN number matches the one we have on record. This could be the break we needed." Michael nodded, though his mind was still spinning. The truck was a lead, but they still had so much to figure out. There were still too many unanswered questions, too many missing pieces. He could feel the weight of it all pressing down on him, but for the first time in years he had a small glimmer of hope. Sarah squeezed his hand again, pulling him back into the present. "Whatever happens, we're doing this together. We're not giving up." And in that moment, Michael realized that no matter how dark the path had been, no matter how many obstacles they faced, they had each other. That was the one thing that hadn't changed. The journey was far from over, but they were ready to face whatever came next as a family. The following days were a blur of phone calls, meetings with the police, and the anxious waiting for results. Michael could hardly focus on anything else, his mind constantly drifting back to the truck, to the small glimmer of hope it had ignited. He couldn't stop thinking about the man who had dropped it off at Frank's junkyard. The vague description they had of him, middle-aged African-American, didn't offer much. Michael knew that without more concrete information, they wouldn't get very far. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this man was key to everything. Whoever had been involved in hiding the truck, whoever had orchestrated the cover-up, was still out there. Michael knew that they needed to find him. They needed to find out what had happened to Lucas, and why this man, this stranger, had left the truck behind without a second thought. Sarah tried to keep things normal, but Michael could feel the strain in her voice whenever they spoke. She was just as consumed by the case as he was, and it was taking its toll on her. She had always been the strong one, the one who held it together when everything else seemed to fall apart. But even she was starting to crack. There were nights when she couldn't sleep, when she lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if they would ever see Lucas again. Those nights Michael would hold her close, but he knew that no amount of comfort would take away the pain, the gnawing uncertainty that kept them both awake. The police kept promising they were doing everything they could, but the waiting was unbearable. Every time Michael's phone rang, his heart would leap into his throat, only to be disappointed when it was just another telemarketer or someone asking if he had heard about a new lead. The silence between the moments of action felt deafening, like the universe was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Then one morning, as Michael was going through the pile of old case files in his office, the phone rang. His heart jumped again, but this time when he picked up, it wasn't a telemarketer or an irrelevant call. It was Officer Reyes. Her voice was calm, but there was a noticeable edge to it, like she was holding something back. "Michael, "We've found something," she said. "We've matched the DNA on the truck to Lucas." The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. He felt lightheaded, his vision blurred for a moment. Lucas was alive. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't some false hope. They had proof now. Michael could hardly breathe, but he managed to say the words. "When? Where is he? Is he okay?" Reyes's response was steady, but Michael could tell that there was still a lot more to be done. "He's alive, Michael, but we still don't know where he's been or what happened to him. We need you to come down to the station. There's more to the story, and we need your help with the next steps." Michael could barely process the words as they hung in the air, echoing in his mind. Lucas was alive. After 6 years of wondering, of hoping against hope, of battling with the weight of the unknown, Lucas was alive. It was a revelation that left Michael trembling, overwhelmed by a rush of emotions he didn't know how to handle. He was barely able to respond, his mind spinning. Officer Reyes had been calm, professional, but there was no way to mask the gravity of what she had just told him. Lucas was out there, somewhere, and they had finally found evidence that proved it. The call ended abruptly, and Michael stood there, holding the phone in his hand as his legs felt like they might give way. He was overwhelmed with relief, disbelief, and fear all at once. He felt like he was suffocating in the enormity of it. His son, the little boy who had been stolen from him, was still alive. But what had happened to him? Where had he been for all this time? What horrors had he endured? Michael's heart ached just thinking about it. His first instinct was to rush to the police station to go straight to his son, but Reyes had told him they needed him to come in and discuss things first. He forced himself to collect his thoughts, to steady his breathing. He looked at the phone one more time before setting it down and grabbing his keys. Sarah needed to know. He couldn't wait another second. He needed to hear her voice, to tell her that their son, their little boy, was still out there. He rushed into the living room where Sarah was sitting, her face tense as she flipped through old photos of Lucas, trying to piece together memories of the time before he vanished. She looked up at him when he entered, her expression unreadable, and he could hardly bring himself to say the words. But he knew there was no other way to break it to her. "Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "they've found him. Lucas is alive." For a moment there was silence. Sarah's eyes widened and then her face crumpled, as if the weight of what Michael had just said had taken a moment to settle in. She stood up, her hands shaking, and Michael could see the tears welling up in her eyes. She couldn't believe it. She wouldn't believe it until she saw their son again. "We have to go to the station," Michael said, trying to keep his voice steady. "They want us to come in, they have more details." They drove in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Michael's mind raced with 1,000 questions, each one more urgent than the last. Where had Lucas been? How had he survived? Why had no one found him before now? The journey to the police station felt like it took an eternity, and Michael could feel the tension in the air, both inside the car and around him. When they finally arrived at the station, Reyes was waiting for them. Her face was grim, and Michael could see that she was struggling to keep her composure. She motioned for them to follow her into a small room where they could talk in private. As they sat down, Reyes began to explain what they had discovered. "The DNA match was just the beginning," she said. "We've confirmed that the truck was indeed linked to Lucas's disappearance, but there's more to this. We've also discovered that Lucas wasn't alone. There's evidence to suggest that he had been kept with someone else, someone who may have been involved in his abduction." The weight of her words hit Michael like a ton of bricks. Someone else had been involved in his son's abduction? The shock of it all made it hard to focus, but he forced himself to listen closely. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The revelation hit Michael like a cold wave crashing over him. Someone else had been involved in Lucas's abduction. The thought of it was almost too much to bear. His son had been kept captive all these years, but to learn that someone else was responsible, that there was another layer to this nightmare, made his stomach churn. He had been so consumed by the idea of Lucas being stolen by one person, by the ice cream truck driver, the man who had seemingly disappeared into the ether. But now it felt like the story was far more complicated than he could have ever imagined. Reyes paused for a moment, allowing Michael and Sarah to process the information. "We have reason to believe that the person who had Lucas, the person who helped hide him, is still out there," she continued, her voice steady but firm. "We don't have all the details yet, but we are following a strong lead. We're going to need your help, Michael. We're asking for your cooperation with the next steps. We need to find this person and bring them to justice, but we also need to protect Lucas from whatever they might try to do next." The words felt like a distant echo as Michael processed everything. They had found Lucas, but the road ahead was still so uncertain. He had 1,000 questions but no answers. Who could have done something so horrible to a child? What kind of person would take a young boy and hide him away for years, and why? But one thing was clear. This was only the beginning. The journey to bring Lucas home was not over. The police were determined, and with the new evidence they had, they would uncover the truth no matter how long it took. Michael and Sarah knew that they had a long road ahead of them. The emotional scars of the past 6 years would never fully heal, but the one thing they had always clung to, the one thing they had never let go of, was their hope. Now, for the first time, they had proof. Lucas was alive, and he was coming home. As they left the station that day, Michael felt a sense of finality settle over him. It wasn't the happy ending he had imagined, but it was the beginning of something new. They were going to get their son back, and no matter what it took, they would make sure that Lucas would never have to face the darkness of his past alone again. The journey was far from over, but Michael knew that the love they shared as a family was stronger than anything that had tried to tear them apart. They were together again, and that was all that mattered.